Hey, what's up, Patriots? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have with us Richard Mitchell from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm just gonna ask him a few questions. So what branch were you in?
I was in the U.S. Army.
What was your job like? Like, what did you do on a daily
Okay, the
basis?
title of my job, my military occupational specialty, was called Area Intelligence Specialist, which meant that we studied intelligence information of various countries. Technically, we learned about various areas of the world, what their problems were, what the issues were. It's sort of like a little history course. One thing I would have to say, a lot of people think the military is loaded with people who aren't very intelligent or very smart. I'll tell you, in the military, in that intelligence branch, I met people who were multilingual. They could speak 3 or 4 languages. They knew your world history, your current history, everything. Just unbelievably intelligent people. Of course, it was called the intelligence.
Yeah. So what did an average day look like for you?
Okay, an average day, I was sent after my training. I was had training for 6 months, which was very long. That was a very long period of training. It was 2 months in basic training. Then we had 6 months of training at Fort Holabird, Maryland. Most people who went in the military at that time, you had 2 months of basic training where you learn how to march, how to shoot rifles, that sort of thing. Then you went to what they call AIT, or Advanced Individual Training, which meant that it could be anywhere from 2 months. 2 months was about average. So you went from 2 months of basic, 2 months of other training, and then some of those people could be sent right then and there to Vietnam. And so it's kind of like, that was very much of a culture shock. Everything really turned upside down. If getting drafted into the military was kind of an upside down thing, it'd be like saying, well, you got to serve a sentence. Really, in a lot of ways, is very similar. You had no choice. So if you didn't report for military duty or induction into the services, you would either have to leave the country, go in, or go to jail. Those were the 3 options. And I had that one statistic in there. They said they felt during the Vietnam period from 64 to 75, they felt that 100,000 left the country. Most of them went to Canada. So you could go there and nobody would bother you again. But again, coming back to the U.S. could be a problem. Because technically you would be a criminal because you avoided service, you didn't report.
Yeah. So why did you join the military?
Okay, I did not want to get drafted into the military, meaning if you were drafted in, you could get any occupation that they needed. So whatever they had to fill, wherever in the world, is where you would go. Some people, there were some duty stations, what we called a duty station, that were known as hardship duty. Hardship duty, Korea, right along the border with South Korea and North Korea, that's considered still today as a hardship duty, meaning you have virtually no other good time activity other than doing your day's duty, sleeping, getting up the next day and doing exactly the same thing. I mean, not a real fun time. I mean, there's hardship locations in Korea, Alaska. Those are considered hardship. There were areas in Southeast Asia also that were considered hardship. Some, not necessarily Vietnam, because that was like so heavily occupied by over 500,000, but there's some areas of other parts of Southeast Asia were considered as hardship duty.
So were you able to travel a lot in the
Yes,
military?
when I was in the military, I was already multilingual. I had studied Russian language in college. I had studied German language in both high school and college. I was very fluent in German even when I first got to Germany. So quite wisely, they sent me to Germany. I mean, it didn't necessarily mean that, you went to training. The only guarantee I had when I signed up for 3 years was that I would get intelligence school. The intelligence, military intelligence was the specialty I signed up for. That's the only guarantee you had. You would go to that training. After that training, they could have sent you anywhere. You could have become a cook or a guy that was a combat engineer. Combat engineers, they had like 2 months of training at Fort Leonard Wood. Also, some of the guys that I went to basic training with, they had basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, and then they were there another 2 months for combat engineer training. Combat engineers are the guys who build bridges and fix up buildings and roads if they get destroyed, figure out a way to get troops and material to different places. Interestingly, my dad's brother, he was in World War I, and he was a combat engineer. That was his specialty. He was drafted in, but his specialty was combat engineer. And I believe his training, I believe, though, was in Texas. But so some of that stuff moves around. Fort Leonard Wood, I don't believe, was established until after World War I. But you had, like, basically in the U.S. at that time, you had basic training facilities or camps or forts in different parts of the country. Fort Ord in California was a huge one. Most of the people from West Coast went there. Fort Leonard Wood picked up most people from Chicago, St. Louis, Midwest, upper Midwest. We went there. Fort Campbell, Kentucky, or Fort Knox, Kentucky, where they have the Federal Reserve money, the gold, they keep it at Fort Knox. They have a training camp there. Then I think there was also another large training camp in Virginia, but they had them in various parts of the country. In that Vietnam period, they were drafting up people just literally left and right. In 1968, February of 68, they had what they call the Tet Offensive. Tet was a lunar New Year. It occurred in February. Well, when that happened, the Vietnamese had a big offensive against U.S. forces. Well, there was a lot of casualties. There was a lot of people that moved against the U.S. military. It took them by surprise, really. Well, after that, the numbers, the draftee notices just really ramped up. It went out huge. So it was with that. I graduated in June of 1968 from college. Well, 2 weeks after I got out, I got a notice to go for a physical, for a military physical. And then after that, you could have got a draft notice, meaning that, okay, you're here, and then if you were okay to serve, then you could be called up. So it was like, I thought to myself, well, I really think I would rather have a choice. I think I would rather put my talents to use, which they did. It worked out really well. Germany was a wonderful place. Over there, my duty was basically to interview people. I'd go out, we'd have a list of people that we would interview. Mostly these were German businessmen who traveled to Eastern Europe. And basically we would start out the conversation of what was it like over there? What are the conditions? We wore civilian clothes. We never said we were in the U.S. military. We just would say, well, we work for a company that does research, a U.S. company. We had some sketchy name of a company. And we say, yeah, this company does research. They like to see what the conditions are. The idea was that eventually they thought Eastern Europe would open up to the West, which eventually did happen. It didn't happen until probably 1989, 1990. When the Berlin Wall fell, that was kind of the key point, that Eastern Europe didn't want to be so heavily communist and controlled. So that opened up. That was the hope. We were kind of selling when we'd interview people. Well, someday the East is going to open up. There's going to be a whole bunch of business opportunities there. We and Americans and Europeans, Western Europeans, can make a a lot of money by selling these people things. When you look now, you can look on YouTube and you can see Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, any Eastern European country, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and that they have modern cars, they have modern homes, they have mostly. I mean, I was always surprised. You see a number of Japanese cars there, and really quite interesting. Literally within a 20-year period, it's all forgotten. Like from 1990 to 2010 even. It's kind of like everything was forgotten. It was like no longer an adversary, no longer a possibility that you're going to drop bombs on each other. When I was in college, there was a push too for people to learn Russian because we thought maybe someday we would go to war with them, and you want to be able to have people that would understand the language and the culture. That's always a big key in dealing with anybody, dealing with any adversary. You want to be able to understand him, understand his language, understand his culture, understand how people think and react to things. I'm surprised that we don't have more things dealing with Arabic language today and Arabic culture, because that's the people today that we would really need to understand and work with. Back in the days that I was going through high school and college, the Soviet Union, that was considered then Russia was the main part of the Soviet Union. Well, this was a huge conglomeration of various countries that the U.S. felt, well, they're gonna start dropping bombs on us. When the Sputnik went up in 1958, the Russians were the first ones to launch a satellite that went around the globe, the world. People here were just freaked out. This thing was only like 2 feet wide, I think. And you could actually see it at night. You could see it go across the sky. And people were just totally freaked out. They're gonna send stuff up there and start dropping bombs on us. That's what people were thinking. Well, from 1958, I was like in grade school at the time, they really ramped up science and mathematics education. It really went, viral, really got very much increased. Then, like as the 60s came in and it was more possibility of having trouble with the Soviet Union, well, then they wanted people to learn Russian or other East European languages so that you would have a defense. It was for defense, basically. So they had like a lot of those things going on. And they really felt that the U.S. and the Soviet Union would probably engage in some type of war. And so that was the preparation.
So, what would you tell people that are thinking about joining the Army, specifically that branch?
I would say there's a lot of really great opportunities in the Army and in the other forces. I chose the Army because they had a good program for intelligence. So that's what I really wanted to do. And the other services had some forms of intelligence, but the Army had that on the ground, person to person sort of intelligence. The other services didn't. So that's what I wanted to do. I read all the James Bond books when I was in high school and college. I said, I want to be like James Bond, and so that's kind of was the mentality. You think, well, gee, I'd like to be like James Bond, and that was one way of doing it. And actually, the other parts of the military, there are people who maybe want to go into healthcare, want to become nurses or doctors. Some of the military services actually send people to medical school to become doctors. They pay for it. So you could go to medical school, become a medical doctor, and you would have no debt, no nothing. But also, they require that once you do that, if they send you through medical school, you generally have to serve in the forces, in the armed forces, for 5 years afterward. But that's not a huge price to pay. Most of the time, doctors, nurses are treated a lot better in the services because you have to protect those people because they're going to work on wounded soldiers and sailors and whatever. So you have to protect them. The Air Force has some great programs. I saw a video that they have a huge triage airplane. And they not only use this airplane for military purposes, if there's a natural disaster in the US, it's like sending a small hospital inside of an airplane to wherever they would need it. Like when you have big hurricanes in Galveston, Texas, or along the South Texas coast, they can send this huge plane there. They can bring people onto that plane, treat them, and if they need some more heavy work, like if they have heavier injuries, they can actually fly them to a hospital somewhere else. It's quite fascinating. I mean, when I saw that one, I thought, wow, if anybody wanted to become an EMT or a healthcare professional, nurse, whatever, I mean, that was like, what a opportunity, you know, like, generally Air Force is 4-year enlistment, that it always has been. Same with the Navy, they are generally longer, 4 years. Army is like 3 years, they also had 4-year programs. So there's like a lot of different programs that people could choose. And I would say for younger people, it all depends on what you want to do. I got my master's degree from a Illinois Veterans Grant. For Illinois veterans, they would waive the tuition at state of Illinois universities. So if you went to like a University of Illinois, Northern Illinois University, whatever, you would get your tuition waived. And this was like almost 40 years after I was out of the service. I thought it was quite a nice program. And so that paid the ticket there. A lot of guys that went in the regular services, they could use via GI Bill to go back to college or go to technical school or trade school or learn something else, some other skill after they left the services. There's a lot of skills that people can learn in the services that can be applied in civilian life. So like of course you have your medical personnel, Medicare professionals. I actually was in the hospital not too long ago where the nurse, it was in a private hospital, he had been a nurse in the military, a man, and he was very good. I mean, just very super great fellow. But it's like, really a lot of opportunities. Like a lot of time people think, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get my head blown off. But for every person who is in the Army, especially, for every person who's on the front line fighting, there are 9 people behind them. So it's like only 1/10 of the people are maybe in real danger at any one time. Other people are just everywhere in the world. I mean, you could have hardship duty, which is like looking out at binoculars across the ocean in northern Alaska, where it's 50 below zero. So that's considered hardship duty. But that's one thing, it might be a minus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there's a lot of opportunities. There's good and there's bad to everything. So I would say, if somebody needed to, gives you a job, it gives you status, it gives you training, because you have status as a veteran, you can go to school, you can do other things. I used to teach GED preparation in a county jail. I one time asked some of the recruiters, they used to come around to the high schools, and I say, well, what if somebody had law enforcement involvement, like they were in jail or prison? And they said, a lot of times that will not disqualify somebody depending on what the offense is. Well, they won't take any sex offenders, they won't take any drug traffickers or stuff like that. However, if somebody did something foolish, which a lot of younger fellas do, most of the time in the county jail it was what they call drunken disorderly. That was most of the people that were in there. They did something, they punched out a police officer or something like that. That kind of person could find something to do in the military. I had a guy that actually, he did go into the Navy. He got himself out, got himself turned around. He did go into the Navy, and I understood that he did fairly well with it, like he did okay. I mean, his prison training or his jail training would have been a perfect segue into the military, because it's a lot of similarity. You're confined, you can't go anywhere, you have to do what somebody tells you. So all of those things are very much like if you're in confinement, like a jail or mental institution or anything. But like I say, a lot of people will think in the military, especially in the Army, you got all these kind of people who are not too swift or not too bright. But I'll tell you, in the intelligence service, there was like some really fantastic people. I mean, you have Army War Colleges, you have West Point, you have Annapolis, you have all of the military academies, colleges that are just really good. And a lot of these people too go on into the government, U.S. government, or other services after military service. So it's like there's a lot of things that are very good about it. That's what I would just tell somebody.
So if you could, would you join again?
Yes, I probably would. I mean, again, my inducement to go into the service was to avoid the draft. The company or the group for my training, my 6-month training, a lot of us were in the same situation. We had either just gotten out of school. There was a deferment if you were in college. Well, sometimes you would lose that deferment if you didn't have a full-time course load. If your grades went down and you were on suspension, you could get drafted in the meantime. So a lot of the people, of the maybe 30 people in my class, the intelligence school class I was in, out of the 30, most of us were probably in that situation where we didn't want to be drafted in. We had other talents that we felt would be more useful, could be used in a better way. So like if you join up, you're up front and you say, well, what kind of offer can I get? What can I do? There's options. It's much better. I'd have to say much better than waiting for them to call you up, and then you would be placed in whatever they needed. So if they needed a guy to drive trucks across the desert, that's what you do. It doesn't matter what kind of knowledge you have prior to that. If that's what they needed, that's what you did. Or if they needed somebody to go on the border of North and South Korea and watch what goes on the other across the border, that's what you did. So it's like there was good things and bad things.
So is there anything else that you would like to tell people that are watching?
Okay, I thought it was interesting too. There was just the reach of the military. Like in the Marines, you have U.S. Marines in every embassy of the world, most consulates also. So it's like if you were a Marine, you could be stationed literally anywhere. The Army is pretty far-reaching. That's the largest of the services. It's pretty far-reaching as far as where one could go. So it's like it's interesting. There were things that you can look at and maybe do that you would maybe never have an opportunity to do, and so it's like I would tell somebody don't think that there's not a possibility for something in the services. There's possibilities. There's training that you can get. Some of that training can apply to civilian life. You can also get funding for other schooling or college or whatever after the military that maybe somebody couldn't afford. If somebody couldn't maybe afford to go to college, they had no money, parents were not rich or anything, maybe that would be an option for them, that they could go in for 2 or 3 years and earn credits to go to college, earn credits to take up some specialty, like becoming an EMT or becoming a nurse. So there's a lot of things that people can do. Then that's what I would emphasize more. There's things that are there that are available. I'll tell you, my wife's brother, he was drafted in for the 2 years. He was sent directly to Vietnam. Not a good experience. He had his life was in danger many times, and you talk to him about his experiences. Of course, they'll be like 180 degrees different from mine. I mean, he had like a not a good experience, And a lot of people that were drafted in and sent to Vietnam, there was some really poor places to be. Like they called them fire bases. You'd be on top of a hill with sandbags around to stop bullets, and you'd be up on top of this hill, and you'd have to just shoot at whatever moved toward you. Yeah, you can get stressed from that. I know that they talk about post-traumatic stress disorder today. Yeah, if you're like wherever you're, staying for a couple of years, and somebody could come up and shoot at you, or pop up out of a hole in the ground and start shooting. Yeah, it works on your head. It's like that's not a good situation. And younger people, most people were not drafted into the military. I believe even in the height of the Vietnam period, it was not until they were 21. They didn't enter until they were like closer to 21 years of age. So it wasn't like 18 and 19-year-olds. A lot of 18 and 19-year-olds did go into the services for want of something to do. They knew eventually they would be subject to call-up. So sometimes the mentality was to just get it over with. You could do what they call volunteer for the draft, meaning tell them, I'll go in, and they'll make a decision of where you go. Usually if you wanted something specific, you'd have to sign up for 3 years. And I would say if somebody signed up for 3 years, almost invariably they got a better deal. I would have to say.
Well, thank you for taking time to do this interview, and also thank you for your service.
Thank you very much.